Keystone Cops.
What's going on, guys? I'm back with another video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Strider 0.75 AR. I did a poll and I asked in my last video, which by the way, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for commenting. If you haven't watched the channel update, please go back and check that out. But I left the poll in the community section and I asked you all to comment on what you would like to see next. Overwhelmingly, 48% of you all said that you would like to see a video on the 0.75 AR Strider. Since recording my video, some things have come up, so this is how this video is going to play out. I'm going to do a tabletop overview recap of my 1 week with this Strider AR, as much as I've been able to carry it and what my experiences have been with it, as well as just the general specs and overall of the knife, just a once over of the knife. The second video I'm going to do will talk about the fact that this is a Strider Medford collaboration and what that means to the best of our general knowledge at this point, because a lot of these things happened on the Facebook group and I know a lot of you guys don't have Facebook or you don't really follow those types of things. So that's that. And then my third video will be what my thoughts are on the situation, and it will be split out that way. So that way, whoever wants to see just about the knife can find out just about the knife. If you want to know a little bit more, you want to find out what's going on, what do you mean collaboration, that'll be a separate video. And then if you care enough to want to know my take on it, it'll be in the third video. So that way no one has to watch anything they don't want to see. So let's get to this video, which again is just going to be a pure tabletop overview of my 1 week with this Strider AR 0.75. Here, this is just my, or not mine. Ooh, thank you, Alan, for letting me hold this Deca. I'm going to be carrying this knife today, so this is what's in my pocket. I'm going to be talking about the AR 0.75, which let's get right into some specifications. The reason I am going to talk about some specifications today, and I don't usually, is that this is a new model, so it's not as clear-cut as something that's been around for 30 years like the S&G. So the S&G also is beside here because the S&G is, you know, the 21 or the XM18 of Strider knives. It's been around forever, kind of like the SMF. Most people, if they have ever handled a Strider, it's going to be a Strider S&G or an SMF. So this is here for size comparisons. If you're wondering why they're up and down like this, if you stack them this way, it skews the perspective of the knife, which makes them look different in size. So with that being said, back to the specifications. This knife is 8 inches overall, the AR 0.75. The Strider S&G is 8 1/4 inches overall length. So now we're talking about the whole knife. The handle of the AR 0.75 is 4.5 inches. The handle of the S&G is 4.65 inches. So this has slightly more handle. The blade is 3.5 inches on both knives. However, if you notice here, because of the choil, even though both of them have a choil of some type, the cutting length of the AR 0.75 is significantly longer. So you can notice that there. However, the blade is significantly more broad, and in the closed position, the AR 0.75 is notably, let's see how we can do this, is notably more broad. So if I stack them directly on top of one another, you can see how much more broad the AR 0.75 is. Now, with that being said, the first thing I'll kind of get into is carry, because that was the very first reason I almost didn't buy this knife. I usually carry my knives, my Strider knives, in a lifter's leather sheath by Dave Abramson. So that's good guy, squared away. He has a website. If you're interested in a sheath, I would talk to him. However, this is a new model, so he usually requires someone to send a model to him so he can make a template off of it, and then he can start making sheaths for them. Very high quality, very reputable guy. Only thing I carry my Striders in, but that's enough about Dave. So the first thing I noticed putting this into my pocket, because I do carry my Striders in my pocket if I'm going to be working around the house. Don't ask me why, but that's typically how it just works out. The first thing I noticed was how strong the tension of this pocket clip is. And it is just a standard unfinished stonewashed titanium pocket clip, typical of any Strider knife, but the tension is much more, is much greater. The clip, as you can see, is the same. Strider uses a standard clip, so there's really no big differences between the shape and size of the clips, but the strength of this one, and actually now that I'm looking at it, this clip might be a little bit wider. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can get this to focus in. I don't know, maybe it's the finish. But anyway, for all intents and purposes, they're very similar clips, but the tension of this clip is much greater. And literally, you can pretty much pull your pants up trying to pull this out of your pocket. So I would like to get a sheath at some point in time. And yes, that is implying that at this point in time, I don't see any reason that I'm going to get rid of this knife. And there's a deeper answer to that. But again, you can check that out in another video. We're doing just a tabletop overview of this knife today. So I do at some point want to see if I can get a sheath made for the knife. The other thing I noticed as soon as I handled the knife is there is no chamfer on this thumb hole, which if you guys didn't know, this also doubles as an oxygen wrench. If you've ever seen an oxygen tank, you can drop this down on there and use it as a handle. But there's no chamfering, which honestly is kind of a good thing. It allows you to get a lot of purchase. The detent is very snappy. The detent is ceramic. It is not a steel detent like in all of the other Striders to the best of my knowledge. It does have a standard lock bar stabilizer that has been seen over many, many years. Speaking of, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, this is based on a previous model, the AR, which is a larger knife. There also is a Tonto version called the GB. Those knives are much larger. They are older. They're not currently in production, and they came in both frame locks and liner locks. So let me add that in here. Apologize for the lack of continuity, but that was one of the first things. The second things I noticed was the lack of chamfering, but it does give you more purchase. This here is not bad, but it's notable, especially going from one to the other. I can't just kind of, you see here, my thumb kind of slips off. Here, I can just pop it right open. Your thumb really sticks to this a lot better than this without being overly aggressive. And you can see the comparison of the two side by side. This is a user, so some of that black oxide is rubbed off. So hopefully that's not creating too much of an optical illusion for you. But you can see this one, that edge is broken. This one, the edge is not. The next thing that I noticed after that is the first batch dropped at SHOT Show, and there were a lot of complaints about the lock bar tension. I don't have any complaints about the lock bar tension. However, if you look at this lock bar, you can see there is a cutout, but there's no chamfering. So what that means is if you're going to flip this open and closed a lot, it is going to hurt your thumb. It is. It's not overbearing if it's something you're going to use here and there, but I would like to see that edge broken. You can see there the line it's put on my thumb. And yes, I know my thumb is goofy and I can bend it weird ways. That is one thing I would like to see changed about the knife, because that directly relates to use and function of the knife. And it is sharp. I guess you could stretch it and say, well, if you're using gloves, but I don't know how many guys are walking around in everyday life with a pair of gloves on. So I think that at least breaking that edge would add to the comfort and function of the knife, in my opinion. The knife now, I'll jump kind of back into more just standard things. It is a hollow ground, 3/4 ground knife with a swedge at the top. This is not sharpened. So it is, there is no sharpened edge on the back. However, if you look at the tip, you can see that the grinds meet up and they terminate pretty much right at the tip of the knife. Pretty close to where it should be. But on this side of the knife, you can see that it is dropped down about a millimeter or so. So the grinds don't match up perfectly. That is what it is. And the flats are stonewashed, while the swedge and the primary grind does have a very nice belt satin, but I'm partial to belt satin, so I'm biased there. The other thing I noticed is that this edge is not typical of Strider knives. Strider usually puts a more aggressive finish on the edge. I'd say more in the ballpark of 400-ish grit, maybe less, but it's typically a toothy edge with no polish that has a lot of aggression and bite. Usually does very well at biting into materials. So that is what I noticed. Using and handling the knife cut well enough. I'm going to get into a little bit about that in a second. A lot of guys will say they're going to grab the knife. A lot of guys will grab it like this. Here, I don't notice any hot spots. Again, I have an extra large hand, 4 inches from, well, 4.5 from here to here. So I do have very large hands. I don't grab any Strider knife like this, but I know that I typically see guys holding them like this. I grab any knife, and Striders, because most of them have some type of finger choil. I do grab them a little bit more choked up, and I don't typically have my thumb on the spine of the blade. I typically have my hand here, and that is how I would do a more aggressive cut. And this is just typically this, or you know, some version of this is how I would typically hold the knife. In these grips, sometimes the tip of this clip is a little bit high, and I do feel it in the palm of my hand, but it's really not anything major. I don't feel it right this second. I guess it's just if my hand shifts around on the blade. This choil right here, if you want to call it that, your finger is close to that edge. So if this knife is pretty razor sharp, what it'll be off of my wicked edge, I'd be very careful if I was going to put my finger in here at all. So that is also something that could be a bit of concern. The jimping here on the back, it is just as sharp as every other edge on this knife, so it is pretty aggressive. Again, I don't typically use jimping, and just putting my hand on it like this, I don't feel that aggression, but it is there. If you're going to be putting your thumb directly on it, it is aggressive jimping. It's like it was machined, and then they barely did the bare minimum to clean it up. And speaking of cleaning up, one of the things I noticed is, again, not typical of Strider knives, when they were machining the knife and I guess cleaning the parts in the process, they did not clean this side here after the milling, so there is some white gunk in these holes. The jimping is pretty standard for Strider. You can see the location is the same. The location is the same. However, you can see that here we have a standoff construction, whereas they usually have a one-piece show scale, as you can see here, and then the standard titanium lock bar side. So those are some differences. The screws are silver. The handle does have a bronze finish to it. The clip, as I said, is just plain stone-washed titanium. And these blade stops do make contact, because I have been asked that before. They do make contact with the top portion, this ear shape here. They make contact on both sides. So you will have that stability from that. There is no side-to-side play. There is no up and down play. It is a solid knife. There is no lock stick. Let's see if I can get that here. There is no lock stick. And it does lock up. It does lock up a little bit later than the newer Striders have typically been locking up. And if you do care, it is smooth enough to drop close when you release that lock bar. And I can't remember, but it does have a ceramic detent, which is not typical of Strider knives. So that's the overall there. I will, one last thing, and I guess I'm glad I covered this at the end, because I know this received some mixed comments last time when I talked about the behind the edge thickness, but it's an important measurement, and I'll explain why in a second. I measured off camera roughly 30 thousandths across the board behind the edge, which is thick. So there you've got 28. Here about the middle of the blade, you've got 29. 6. And here at the tip, you've got 30.5. So this blade is a bit thick behind the edge. I'm not too excited about that either. That would be another thing I would change. But why is behind the edge thickness important? Again, you have your knife, the apex. This would be the portion that you're going to do the cutting with. Your blade is like this. And of course, this is a little bit exaggerated, but there's a shoulder, a hard transition from your secondary grind to your primary grind. As you're cutting through material, you have to get past this shoulder. That is going to take more force if there is more shoulder, if your knife is thicker behind the edge. So that is why thickness behind the edge is an important measure. And blade stock thickness, like a lot of people like to quote, is not the only measurement to look at, and it may not be the most important measurement as a standalone to look at, as I mentioned with knives like the Deca. People will look at something like the Deca or the Bug Out and say, oh my goodness, it's got thin blade stock, it's gonna slice like crazy. That's not necessarily the case. Anyway, I've rambled on enough. I hope you all found this informative. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. Like I said, this was just purely a tabletop overview of the .75 AR. I will do a second video on what exactly we know collaboration to mean at this point. And then I will do a third video on my take on the overall situation. So look for those. I appreciate you guys watching. Remember, a lazy man carries a dull knife.